I wouldn't recommend using ChatGPT as a therapist, although you can ask some interesting questions to ChatGPT and get some decent responses. But if you're not in a good spot, it's very likely that the kinds of questions that you're going to ask won't get you closer to the spiritual healing that you need. It's similar to seeing how many words you can make while missing certain vowels. You can make a lot of words with only a few vowels, but if you're missing all of them, then it's going to be a lot more difficult to communicate. And this is where I think software engineering as a career trajectory can pair up a bit more mindfully with therapy. I've been I've been writing software for the past 13 or 14 years. I'm 28. So we're reaching a point where half of my development has been spent in a context where I can verify the consequences of my language. If I write a program, it doesn't compile unless I write the code correctly. I got started with C++. Then later, with HTML and CSS, I couldn't navigate to specific pages unless the interface made that possible. Then with JavaScript and PHP and MySQL, I couldn't update the database unless I had an interface to do that. That's often different than some of the advice that I got from some of my therapists. Necessarily and helpfully in many ways at many times, and other times I noticed that I wish that I shared that model. As I've developed a relationship to my own senses and the ways that I navigate about them, as distinct from the senses that people projected onto me, I noticed that I had code to navigate my internalizations. Literally, the ways that I experience my emotions can be expressed with software to me. I've also worked on software engineering teams, so I can see how my language plays out in a shared context. I've known that I wanted to use code professionally for more than a decade, and that's inspired navigating the terrible tech industry. It's mostly bad because the people who understand what you understand know you or are you. So when you get deep enough into computer science and you're tired of not doing stuff, you just apply the principles elsewhere. Being able to write code allows you to figure out what the optimal path is through testing and iterative development. If you figure out the shortest path, then you can take that path in the virtual realm and in a realized space. Although there are reasons to mind the distinction between virtual and realized, or virtual and experiential reality. And this is where the philosophy comes in and why it helps to have multiple different perspectives develop over time from multiple different cultures. Some of my therapists have taught me that not every therapist is going to work well with me. Technically, all of my trauma has made me who I am today, although somebody who knows about my trauma is going to have a different experience if they go through the same thing. I'm going to say that I wouldn't recommend experiencing the hardest parts of what I went through. And if somebody does that to you, they're going to not be. I want to be mindful of how I say this. No one should feel inspired to traumatize you into development, and some development is traumatic. Software development gives you a lot of language to consider which things are changing and why. Also, who can understand them, how long it takes to get somebody else to understand the space, technically and non technically, and then what's useful over time. What do you care about year after year? What do you not want to do again? So I believe that art therapists and software therapists can be part of your development. People who can illustrate the abstract emotions that you're feeling and associate them with technical language. Something to be tremendously mindful of is the internalization of the sense of truth that might come from seeing a seemingly canonical structure. And this is where I believe a licensure program would be necessary to bridge software engineering and therapy. From junior through senior to principal engineer, there is a progression of software engineering development. And there are ways to scale this down for a more concise development program, training program, I should say. There are ways to make the software engineering career more concise for the sake of training therapists. The advantage would be being able to relate to a clientele that has internalized physics that can sometimes be tricky. I also believe this can tie into tangible interface design, and I'm going to be making more videos about that later.